The time is 9:15 and this hour is brought to you by Africa Muslim Agency. This is Fired Up with Hafiz Imran Chunaria. He is a personal excellence mentor and the CEO of Africa Muslim Agency. You are listening to News and Views on Salam Media, and I'm your guest host, Dr. Sumaya Hendricks. We are now chatting the rise of podcasts in South Africa, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome our next guest on the show, a podcast extraordinaire, author, intellectual, and if I must say, all round incredible human being. Dr. Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for joining us.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So we are chatting about the rise of podcasts in South Africa, and Sizwe, you have a channel on YouTube, which is also available on different platforms called SMWX. For the benefit of all our listeners, what exactly is a podcast and what are the different types of podcasts out there?
A podcast is exactly like what you're listening to right now, except you can listen to it whenever you want to listen to it. So it's kind of like media on demand. Usually people listen to them on their phones, via streaming services, or on YouTube. So there are many different kinds of podcasts covering sport, entertainment, current affairs, and news. But of course, what we do at SMWX is largely related to current affairs. So it's a place you can go and watch conversations, interviews, analysis about South Africa, what's happening in it, and its politics.
So, for people out there who don't currently listen to any podcasts, why should they switch from listening to traditional media houses or watching shows on TV? What is the benefit from tuning into podcasts?
Well, part of it is joining the global wave. Media is shifting to its digital form. As people listen to Salam Media, they'll appreciate that. And in many ways, podcasts plug a gap that has been left by mainstream channels. Mainstream media, because of its incumbency and because it has become somewhat complacent, has really failed to capture the imagination of audiences, I think in South Africa, but also across the world. And because podcasts are not brought to you, you have to go to them. There's a lot more incentive to create something of interest to arrest the viewer's attention. And there's just a whole lot of creative work going on in South African and global digital media right now, where in mainstream channels, often you get cookie cutter programs that try to cater for everyone, and therefore they really end up catering for no one. Whereas on podcast platforms, you can get very niche information that's tailored specifically to an interest that you might pursue. The other interesting thing, particularly about SMWX, that I would raise is we have long form conversations. So we don't cut off our guests because we have to conform to a specific time slot. And that really gets you into the mind of some of the key decision makers in the country. So, for example, we've spoken to several ministers recently, and you hardly ever get to understand what a minister is like as a person when you see them across the media, in a news broadcast, for example. But here we actually get into their minds. We're able to explore their views, and that just gives you a deeper insight on what's going on in the country at any given time.
Hmm. And now tell me, since the time you've started SMWX up till now, what are some of the changes you've seen in the podcast industry?
Well, the biggest change I would say over the last few years is that podcasts have become mainstream. When I started SMWX in 2019, various people accused me of being crazy because digital media was still in its infancy, but it's quite incredible how fast the take up has been on digital media. And so now you're seeing podcasts which are making important and impressive revenue. You're seeing podcasts which our traditional broadcasters are now turning to for news themselves, and podcasts are now breaking the news. And this is in conformity with the global trend. For example, if you look at the US election, Donald Trump went on 14, like him or loathe him, he went on 14 podcasts in the week leading up to the US election. And Kamala Harris, who lost the election, only went on one. She preferred to go on traditional media platforms. And that just shows that in other places, podcasts have actually, in many ways, overtaken the traditional news sources. And I think we're starting to see something similar happening in South Africa.
Hmm. So with this growing platform, you spoke about traditional media not having the flexibility to compared to podcast platform, but also a lot of people turn away from traditional media because of the kind of influences and agenda or the perceived agendas that they can see manifesting itself on your TV screens. Um, so the question is here is that how does this platform and this growing platform kind of protect itself to forces that try to capture it, and is the industry susceptible to this capturing? Sizwe, are you with us?
Yes, I'm with you.
Great. I'll just maybe repeat the question. We were
Hmm.
just really talking about, you spoke about the influence and the reach of podcasts, but there might be, like with traditional media,
Hmm.
perceptions about these platforms getting captured. Sometimes that's why also people turn away from traditional media because they can sense and they can feel in some way that the agenda is being captured. How is
Hmm.
the industry susceptible to that, and how does it protect itself from it?
Yes, I think like all media, digital media is susceptible to capture. And we're in a very interesting moment right now because I think that those who've attempted to influence mainstream media are turning their view to digital media. And what's more, digital media is probably cheaper to capture than mainstream
Mm.
media.
Mm.
So, like all forms of media, there's a danger of capture. However, on the other hand, when you look at digital media, often you have a lot more flexibility, you have a lot more autonomy to play by your own rules because you've built your own audience, and the audience hasn't come to you. You've had to actually generate that audience, and they're there because they want to hear your authentic voice. So it would be counterproductive in many ways to depart from that voice. But yes, I mean, we need to keep our eyes open. One of the dangers of podcast media or of digital media more broadly is that there are no rules really. You know, in
Mm.
mainstream platforms, broadcasting number, whereas
We
in
just lost
digital
you a little
media,
bit there.
it's wild, wild west. And in some ways, that
Caesar, we
creates
just
very
lost you a little
cinematic
bit there on the
media
sound.
programming, but in other ways, you also get a lot of nonsense. And so I wouldn't want to romanticize podcast media too much. You've got to take the rough with the smooth. But the great thing from the consumer's perspective is you opt in to what you want to listen to. You don't have to listen to that which you don't feel is valuable.
Mm.
And
Caesar,
so
if we
when you
can, I'm
separate
so sorry to
the wheat
interrupt
from
you.
the chaff, there are still some gems that you can find in podcast media. And let's hope that the prospects of capture, do not influence this new digital form.
No, thank you for that. Caesar, sorry, I think there's just a little bit of a trouble with your sound in the last minute. If we can maybe just ask you to come closer to your device or take it off speaker. Um, so, what
Yes,
do you see the
sure.
growth of the industry in the next 5 years? Where do you see the industry going?
Well, I would make a bold prediction and say that by the time we get to the next election in South Africa, digital media will be more important than
Mm,
mainstream media.
mm.
It'll be
National
similar to what,
election.
yeah, absolutely.
Mm,
So the
mm,
2029 election. I mean, next year's election will also be very important, and you'll certainly see all of the major politicians taking to digital media, certainly in the news space. But I think it's fairly inevitable that digital media, especially podcasts in South Africa, are going to become extremely influential. And as you've alluded to, that comes with dangers and hopes. And as a society, as a country, we need to think about what we do with this new medium. It's still so fresh that questions of regulation are very difficult to forecast at this point. But I would see massive growth. Just on my channel, we see the number of subscribers doubling and doubling and doubling. Nearly every 6 months, and we're up to 220,000 subscribers now. And I think you're going to have a lot of massive channels in the next 5 years with millions of subscribers. And certainly our news landscape is going to shift, our entertainment landscape is going to shift, and our wider digital media landscape is going to shift.
Mm. And other than how the viewers perceive podcasts and how they've been responding to it, how have you found the actual guests themselves? Like, has it become a lot easier to get guests on your podcast? And do you think the same resonates for other podcasters?
Well, two things on that. The funny the funny thing I see is that because my interviews are slightly different to the traditional mainstream interview, where in some cases with a politician you're badgering the guest and you're really confronting them, I take a more sit back approach, and where I try to get the guest to divulge things that they've never divulged and create a certain sense of comfort in the interview for the guest. Of course, there are aspects of accountability, but it's not one dimensional. And you can kind of see these newsmakers and politicians over time opening up. And people always say on my show that people say things they never thought that they would say. And that's partly because the environment of a podcast interview is different. It's almost a conversation between equals. It's the kind of conversation you would have in real life, not a staged conversation that you would expect via an official broadcaster. And that creates new and interesting moments for the audience to appreciate and understand the person, but also the politics behind the person in new depth. But yes, I must say these days it's a lot easier to get guests. In the first few years, it was quite a struggle, but we now have many people banging down our door to come onto the podcast, and that's something we're very proud of.
Mm. Now, for the people listening, maybe the aspiring podcasters listening, or maybe parents of aspiring podcasters, what advice do you would give to them? Is this a career that they could pursue?
Study the greats and become greater. And just like all other crafts, digital media and podcasting is a craft, and you've got to master many concurrent skills. You've got to understand the technical side of things, whether that's broadcasting, cameras, microphones, sound, sets. Then there's also the production, media, typical producer side of things, how to get guests, how to frame questions, how to analyze issues. There's writing, how to create a script that arrests the viewer's attention. There's all the broadcasting elements of, the visual and digital feel. So you can see that behind a podcast, especially if it's a videographic podcast, you're balancing multiple things at once. And there's definitely a career there. Podcasts are and digital media is becoming an increasingly lucrative field, and it falls within the broader digital fields that are growing exponentially now, from AI to forms of new digital finance, and digital media is a subsection of that. So I certainly think we will see new businesses that are grown around podcasting, and I would encourage those who have an eye and an ear for digital art, digital media, digital news to pursue those trends. Of course, hard work goes into it. Understanding how these platforms work, especially the platforms that are serving your content out, like the streaming services, the major tech companies that are delivering this via an algorithm, and figuring your way to get to a massive audience is part of the game. But if you can do that, I believe that we have a very exciting new industry on our hands.
Mm. Now, what about for people who want to see transformation in the media landscape in general? Maybe they're investors or philanthropists or businesses wanting to diversify their ad revenue. What is the incentive and why really should people want to invest in podcasts as a means of transformation in the media landscape?
Well, let me give two reasons. The first is political, if I may. If you look at South Africa's digital media landscape right now, we are outgunned by right wing platforms. And this is also true the world over in the example that I related in terms of Donald Trump. In South Africa, conservative, quite frankly, right wing digital media is outpacing progressive media, and it's better funded. And so if we look to the future, if all of our media platforms are leaning towards a conservative, regressive outcome, that's going to have impact on our society. And I think that's part of the reason why we have seen a resurgence of right wing interests in South Africa, because they thrive and they grow on these digital media platforms. So we have to counter that, and we have to really get wise to that very soon. And unfortunately, my platform is one of the few at the moment that is trying to counter that within the digital media space. The other reason, just from a purely financial perspective, is that it's a no brainer if you're an advertiser. Podcasts have a bigger reach, a more loyal audience, and they're cheaper to advertise on. So, why would you want to spend more money to an audience that isn't watching when you have a captive audience that you can advertise to for cheaper? It won't always be like that. Of course, it'll ultimately become the same cost as mainstream media, but right now you can get 1 million views a month for a fraction of the price that you would pay on mainstream media. So there's a clear business case for advertisers to turn to digital media, as I hope they're also doing on Salam Media.
Hmm. So to end off, a theme of hope is being carried throughout the show. And tell me, what is your hope for the industry? Yeah, what keeps you hopeful?
My hope for the industry is that with this newfound freedom and with this newfound reach, we're able to
Sizwe, I think we just lost you there. Just give you some time to come back. My hope is that you come back as we talk about hope. There was just a bit of signal that got interrupted. The time is 9:33, and you are listening to News and Views on Salam Media. I'm your guest host, Dr. Sumaya Hendricks. We're just waiting for Dr. Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, who we are chatting about the rise of podcasts with, to return. Okay, I think he might be struggling with some connection issues. We'll try to get him on the phone. But really interesting discussion about the rise of podcasts and the potential that it holds for society, for individuals, and the kind of projection that we see in the industry in terms of where we can take it. So we're trying to see if we can get him back online. All right, it's 9:34, and hopefully he will be back with us shortly. Sizwe, are you there? I think you'll be with us. Are you there now?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Thank you so much, and apologies you got cut off. You were just telling us, I was hoping you come back so you can tell us about your hope for the future and what gives you hope about this sector.
Well, I have a great deal of hope that this new wave of media can contribute to a new future for South Africa. We need a vision of a country that has good governance, a country that is fighting corruption,
a country that is pursuing justice, that is overcoming the injustices of its past, a country that's on a new trajectory of economic growth. And sometimes we expect the politicians to create that for us, but I think politicians often are just reacting to the agenda that media sets. So we also need media platforms that are setting that agenda for change and championing a new vision for our society. And that society is a hopeful one if we can reach it. And that's what fills me with hope when I get up in the morning.
Thank you so much. It's 9:35, and that was Dr. Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh talking to us about the rise of podcasts. You are listening to News and Views, and I'm your guest host, Dr. Sumaya Hendricks. We will now